Hello, everybody. Welcome to LOAC-TV. I'm your host, Kurtis Findley, and we have a great special guest who I'm going to introduce in just a second. But I do want to say first, thank you for joining us. If you are watching this after it's live, then you can go ahead and leave some comments, and I'll try to address them after the fact. But if you are watching this live with us, please feel free to leave some comments if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube. Paul is here, and we're going to answer your questions if you have any of them. We'd love to interact with you, so go right ahead and do that. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and on Twitter. LOAC or LOC Comics is our handle on all of those places. And don't forget to also subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be up to date with all of our continuing live streams, of which we are going to be doing them every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us every Friday for that. So I want to introduce our special guest, Paul C. Tumey. Hi, Paul. Welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody.
Now, Paul is an author, a historian, and a comic artist and writer himself. He does his own stuff. And if you follow him on his Instagram account, you'll be able to see a lot of his own material, plus a lot of the stuff that he's collected over the years. You post some really great comments, and I've particularly been enjoying those old Little Lulu cartoons that you've been posting from some of the old books you've recently found.
Yeah, Marge Buell. I don't know how to say her last name. Buell, but those are amazing. I always kind of snobbishly looked down on those cartoons because of the John Stanley comic book stories are just so amazingly great. But it turns out the cartoons on which they're based, the panel cartoons, are just as charming. And in fact, I think Stanley took some of his inspiration from those.
Oh, absolutely.
Stories. But yeah, that'll be an essay maybe someday if I can get around to it. I have some interesting stuff on her, but I love those cartoons. Thanks.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. So let's see. Let's talk about you a little bit before we get into talking about comics. You have a big interest in the old Screwball comics, comedy, humor comics from, the turn of the century up until, the war years and even beyond that. So why do you have an interest in those? What's your history?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and probably one for the therapy couch. But I think I always loved it when my dad, who was a professional librarian and a hard worker in his life, would occasionally cut up and be silly. It was so incongruous, so unexpected and hilarious. I remember one time he broke into a cheerleader rant and did sis boom bop, sis boom bop. And, I was like 5 or 6 and I just laid on the floor, killed myself laughing. And also, my mom and dad were big fans of comics. We were talking about Little Lulu. My mother was a big Little Lulu fan. She used to tell stories about having a quarter allowance every week in Ponchatoula, Louisiana, and buying, going to the movies, buying, soda pop and popcorn, and then having a dime left over to buy the Little Lulu issue for that month.
Oh, yeah.
And that was her big treat. And so there were always comics around, and I just really like that non-ironic style of humor, that embrace of nonsense and absurdity. It fits with how the world seems to me. Very little seems to make sense. The theme of my life is bewilderment. So these comics, embrace that and sort of teach you to laugh at it. I think it's like a tonic for me, good medicine.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then you've done some work with Library of American Comics. First of all, here, I'll show everybody this huge book, Screwball, the cartoonists who made the Funnies funny. And we'll dig into this a little bit later. Yep, there you go, matching books. But you've also done some work on this one here, the Library of American Comics Essentials, the Bungle Family. And you did an introduction to this book here. Now, how did your association with the Bungle Family begin?
Well, it began with a comment on another Essentials volume, one of the very first ones, Baron Bean, and I left a comment on Amazon, and I said something like, I was praising the book, and I said, it's a book of slapstick comics that's shaped like a slapstick.
Yep.
And Dean really liked that, and I don't know how, but we got to communicating through email, and it turned out we're both huge fans of the Bungle Family. And I said, hey, why don't we do a Essentials book on the Bungle Family? And Dean said, twist my arm. So I got to do the introduction, and it was a great honor. And I wanted to mention, I just noticed in my copy, I have folded up, sorry, I'm getting used to the camera. So I have folded up here this little document. And if you, if viewers haven't seen the previous episode with Dean Mullaney in this series, I highly recommend it. And in that episode, he talks about all the research he did for Barney Google, where he acquired years, if not decades, of strips, his box of Barney, and then he read like 15 years worth to pick out the best stories for that Essentials volume. Well, he did the same thing for the Bungle Family, and this is a printout of an email or a document that he wrote, and I think I added to it as well. And this is a synopsis of the storylines of certain of particular years of the Bungle Family. And so we both compared notes and tried to pick the best year for the Bungle Family. And so we wound up with 1930.
Yeah.
And
so what is it about 1930 that makes it better than what came before and what came after?
Well, there actually, you could pick any year in the late 20s and early 30s for the Bungle Family, and they're going to be great. So it sort of came down to personal preference. There's a great storyline in this one where George Bungle is going to possibly receive an inheritance from a wealthy relative, and it's very funny. I don't want to, no spoilers. I don't want to give it away, but there's some just particularly comical sequences in this book, and yeah, there you go. So there's the introduction.
Oh, we got to see your name. Hold on, let's go back to the beginning so we can see your name on here.
Yeah,
there you are.
Such crust. That's something George Bungle says all the time about people. If you don't know the strip, it's hilarious. It's about a married couple who disapprove and gossip about everybody around them, but then everybody around them also gossips about them. But George is always saying, that guy, such crust. Oh, look at that one. Isn't that lovely? That Christmas strip. There's a few of these. There's a wonderful Thanksgiving strip in there too. So yeah, these are just wonderful.
This one is a 2-tier strip. He really plays with the format. Usually it's a 4-panel layout like this.
Yeah,
but this one right here, 6 panels in 2 tiers, and then this one's one big long panel. But the way he's divided up, it's like little panels.
Right, and
all
the
the way
first
across.
letter of each speech balloon is spelling Merry Christmas.
It's fantastic,
and that's a hilarious strip. I write about it in the introduction. The humor here is. There's some argument as to whether the Bungle Family is a Screwball strip or something else, but the humor is really biting and very clever and witty. And as you can see, there's a lot of words. There's a lot of verbiage.
Yeah,
Bill
there
Blackbeard
sure is.
said something like, a dense fog of speech balloons. So, it's a different kind of reading experience than modern comic strips, which by necessity are printed smaller, so they have less dialogue, sometimes very few words at all. This takes a long time to read, but it's very satisfying, and it's really funny. It's all about the foibles of human nature. So it's not that topical, although it captures parts of that time period, such as the way people dressed. And well, actually, yeah, I'll show you in a minute. other interesting aspects at the time. I have a nice piece of original art to show you.
You want to see that right now?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. Let me just change the camera around.
In the previous episode of LOAC-TV, you were talking about clubs, societies. You had become aware that, you know, men had these clubs they belonged to. There's a great Laurel and Hardy movie about that. If you want to check that out, it's called Sons of the Desert. It's probably, I think it's their best movie, and I highly recommend it. And Sons of the Desert is the name of the club that they belong to. Anyway, this page right here, this is a page of original art of the Bungle family. It's a Sunday. You see it's left blank up here for the newspaper to put their masthead.
Right.
And look at this. And
it's huge.
And it is weird because it's all colored. A lot of times when you see strips like this, the first couple of panels would be colored as a color guide.
Yeah.
You know, so they would know, you know, make the robe red with yellow flowers or whatever those are, patterns. So
yeah,
the whole strip is colored, and actually a lot of the Bungles are fully colored, which is a mystery. No one really knows why that's the case.
Wow.
This is about clubs. It's about George and a neighbor arguing over which club is the best. So George thinks his club, the Owl Club, is the best, and his neighbor thinks the Nighthawk Club is the best, and they get into fisticuffs over it.
Right on.
That's, you know, clubs are the subject of this entire strip. I'll show you the back of it. There's really nothing on the back.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That is just incredible that it's so huge, and I would imagine that it needs to be that big so that he can actually letter all of the letters in there, because it's just so, there's so many words.
I think you're onto something, Kurtis. That might be why they're so big, because of the lettering. And you know, the character of the artist, who we should mention, Harry Tuthill, he was sort of known to be kind of a curmudgeon and tight-fisted. So I have a theory that maybe these are fully colored because he didn't want his assistants to have any downtime. So if there was a little downtime, well, like maybe they were waiting for him to write the next strip, he would say, "Go color a Sunday." That's my theory. We don't have any documentation of that, but we do have documentation of one beautiful thing. And Dean told me every time he thinks about the Bungle family, he can't get this image out of his mind. In the introduction to the book, there is an excerpt of an interview with a cartoonist who in his early years worked as an assistant for Harry Tuthill. So Tuthill he lived in Missouri, and he would mail the strips in to New York and or Cleveland. I think it was Cleveland. And anyway, he worked out of his home, and so his assistants would come into his home every day and set up shop. And while they were working, he liked to go take a dip in his swimming pool.
Yeah.
And he liked to swim, shall we say, au natural, no clothes on. And he would, so in this interview, there's a quote about him just every day casually walking past these, the cartoonist toiling away, doing his inking and lettering and whatnot. And he's perfectly naked.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful. That I think that really captures a lot of his attitude toward life as well. And that comes through in these strips. It's so interesting because they are like, at some times they're so cavalier about what they do and who they are, and at other times they're so uptight and cranky. And it's just, you said it well. It's like there's a lot to read in these. It takes a long time, but the payoff for reading all of the word balloons is so good, because it's so sharp and so witty and really, really biting. It's great.
It is. It gets to the point where after you've read enough Bungles, you begin to sort of look at life that way a little bit.
I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
And I have a bit of an argument. In my mind, I'm picturing us as George and Josie Bungle. Art Spiegelman said the Bungle Family. Well, actually, I think it's on the back cover. No, actually, I was lucky enough to be quoted on the back cover. But on the front cover, he says, "One of the darkest visions of American life this side of the West."
Yep, that's true. That's what it is.
And he was asked by American Heritage Magazine in the 80s, I think, to list the best comic strips, and he put the Bungle Family at the top.
Oh wow, there you go.
I think I'm getting that wrong. Not the best comic strips, but the best underrated comic strips, something like that.
Right.
But he was the one sort of bringing it to the forefront, decades before other people were even talking about it.
Great.
So,
wow. Okay, if you out there who are listening have any questions about Bungle Family or stuff for Paul, feel free to leave a comment. We did get one comment from Omar Comics that says, "Thanks for doing this, fellas. I got my Steve Canyon volume last week." Steve Canyon was what we talked about last week, and yeah, that's a newly released book, so I'm glad. Oh, Volume 1, Steve Canyon Volume 1. He's starting at the beginning. You got a long road ahead of you. It's good, some good stuff. Okay, so one of the things that I really like to do on these live streams is read the April 27th comic strip from whatever book we're talking about, because that's my birthday, April 27th. So I'm sure so many of you are like this. Like, I wonder what comic strip came out on my birthday. And so this is a comic strip that features both of the Bungles. So let's see here. I'm going to add this. And I think that we should split up the parts.
These are so well designed, Kurtis. Just a word about Dean's prowess as a book designer. Up in the upper left corner, you can so easily and clearly see the date. It's so easy to find April 27th in this book. I really admire that.
So April 27th actually happens to be a Sunday.
Right.
And since the Sundays are not in this collection, we're going to go with April 28th. Monday, April 28th. So here's the solo. I think do you should be Henry.
You mean George?
Or sorry, George. No, Henry's the author. Yeah, you be George, okay? So you read his lines.
Fine stuff. Locking me in that kitchen so I couldn't
get out and continue a lowbrow argument with those moving men, eh? No, sir. For once, we've moved into a nice flat without giving neighbors an impression that you were a pugliest.
Listen, do you know that those moving men talked me into riding on top of the van so they could drive under every low bridge in town and loosen all my teeth?
I told you not to ride with those men. Oh, I knew there was a good reason why it took all those took that moving van all afternoon to get here.
Oh, they didn't know their stuff. Every time they carried something downstairs at the other house, they acted as though they were on roller skates.
The reason you don't like moving men is because they think they know so much about their business as you do.
No, sir. I simply claim that you don't have to be an expert to fall down 2 flights of stairs with a chair in.
Well, anyhow, for once, we've got into the house without the loud talk that always scares the neighbors into...
Oh, Dad, Mother, please, all the neighbors are looking over here and listening.
Wonderful. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, so the daily before, here's George on the moving van.
So there are screwball moments in the strip, a lot of them, and that's one of them.
Yep, this is great. Okay, well, why don't we move on to our
patterns? Look at those patterns.
Isn't
that great? And so much work to do that.
I know, absolutely. And
really
it's not
those assistants busy.
It's not just the patterns. Like, look at this checkered patterns. It's the floral on the fabric, and we got cross hatching here. We've got checker. We got plaid. It's like
those checks aren't easy to do.
All in one panel, and he does this all the time.
Yeah,
they're always wearing different dresses every single panel. Look at that.
But and yet, even though the dresses and the furniture, the upholstery has all these patterns, there's also kind of a dinginess about it, which is really funny because these guys they're middle class and they're trying to be upper class. They're upward mobility, but they're just not making it.
Look at this guy's robe.
Oh yeah, yeah, and he's going to come in and really impress their daughter because he's such a handsome guy. And of course, he turns out to be. Well, I don't want to give a spoiler, but he's not what he seems to be.
He's one of my favorite characters in this book.
Yeah,
He is so good.
yeah, he shows up throughout the years.
Okay, so I think we should probably let's move on to our next book. We're going to talk about Screwball. Let's get. Oops, are you still in my shot here? Where did you go? There you are. Let's talk about Screwball for a little bit. This is kind of your masterpiece of a book, your brainchild. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, it covers 15 cartoonists. Each cartoonist has his own chapter. There's an introduction and an afterward. And I wrote it all, and I selected all the art, and it took me 7 years to make this book. And
7 years, wow, that's great.
Well, not full time, work a
Yeah.
40-hour a week gig for the man, but the cartoonists are sequenced in the book by the order of their birth date. That's how I did that. And it gives you, it starts around the 1880s in terms of the comics that are presented, and goes up to about just after World War II, up into about the late 40s. And that really is kind of the years of the beginnings of screwball humor in American popular culture, and the peak of it, which would be in the late 30s, and then the decline of it after World War II. There's Milk Gross right there.
Yep.
And these cartoonists are amazing to me because screwball humor is, it's a subset of humor comics. Okay. So, and a lot of the early comics, were humor comics, right?
Yeah.
But they weren't necessarily screwball. So take a strip like Blondie. It's a funny comic, and it has funny moments, and there are sometimes kind of slapsticky, over the top things that happen, like the Dagwood sandwich. But by and large, it's sort of steady, like a sitcom.
Right.
But a screwball comic strip is one where there's just a lot of nonsense and a lot of crazy stuff happening, or they'll take a gag and they'll push it much farther than you would normally expect to see.
Right.
And think about Marx Brothers movies, if you're familiar with those. This is sort of like Marx Brothers movies on paper. The screwball cartoonists were virtuosos of their art. They were wonderful cartoonists. They were wonderful writers. But most of all, they were wonderful humorists. I think of them more as comedians working in the medium of the comic strip. And instead of, cartoonist. And so you're looking at some opera right now. And I love opera. I'm very proud of that chapter. It's the longest chapter in the book, and rightfully so, because Opera had a very long career. He really had two careers. He was a magazine cartoonist with Puck magazine for 22 years. Look at that piece of original art there. That was provided by a very nice guy from Italy. I offered to buy the scan, and he just sent it to me for the book. And in that book, speaking of Barney Google, I don't know if you can tell, but that's Billy DeBeck right there.
Oh,
he's named somewhere in the strip. I think it's in the first panel.
Oh yeah, right there in the bottom.
Yeah, sure as my name is Billy DeBeck. And of course, Billy DeBeck was the cartoonist who created Barney Google, which is what you and Dean were talking about in the previous TV episode. So I just thought this was a wonderful piece, and it's a wonderful example of Opper's late art. His eyes had deteriorated, and his line had really changed. He's a little bit like Charles Schulz in his last years.
Yeah, if you compare these two,
it's beautiful still. There's a pureness to the cartooning. He was a master craftsman. Look at how he does that moon in the background.
This feels almost more Harriman.
Well, sure, it's got some wonderful pen work to it. But Harriman was influenced by Opper. Opper influenced everybody.
Yeah.
He's the guy who figured out a lot of stuff about how to do comics. Like I was saying, he started out as a magazine cartoonist, and then he became a newspaper comic strip cartoonist in the very early days of the comic strip. And he created Happy Hooligan, and I think it was, what, 1900. So this is
Wow.
pretty early stuff. But he then went on to become a leading newspaper cartoonist for another 20 or so years. He had a really long career, and he was basically the guy. He was regarded as the master cartoonist of his time. But today, he's more or less kind of forgotten. So I was really proud to do this chapter and research his life. That's Eugene Zimmerman.
What a great panel this is.
They even worked together for a couple of years at Puck Magazine, but then Zimmerman moved on. But another amazing cartoonist. And the thing about Zimmerman is he could draw grotesque. And that's a style of cartooning. Oh, yeah. I see Stephen Smith has mentioned that opera gave us that screwball spin, for which we should be forever thankful. I think it does originate with opera. Yeah, I coined that term to describe, if you can turn back a little bit, there you go, that amazing circular wipeout that opera employs over and over, often in the penultimate panel of a comic.
Yes, it's wonderful. Lynn Johnson uses that in For Better For Worse all the time when the kids are fighting.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't know that.
All the time. Yep. I'll show you a couple of those later.
Comic book shorthand now for, a furious fight.
Yeah.
Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That's from a lithograph. So these guys, in the early days, to do color comics, and this is from a magazine, not a newspaper. This is from Judge Magazine. They had to do lithographs, which means they had to draw these things in wax crayons backwards on a giant marble stone.
Oh my goodness.
So that's how he drew this. Boggles the mind. Now that's a photo. That's a different process right there. So you're able to get more detail in.
Right.
I was really glad to be able to reprint some of these wonderful Lena und Louie comic strips. It's the only comic strip that Zim did. And you see, he was only working in newspaper comics just very briefly for about a year. So those are pretty rare. Oh, this guy. I love this guy, Walter Bradford. He's kind of one of the discoveries of the book. Wonderful humorist from Philadelphia. Not very well known at all.
He's got a Winsor McKay type of thing going on right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely cartooning. And
look at that. Yeah.
This guy, we were talking about how funny Harry Tuthill was in the Bungle Family. This guy had his own unique brand of humor, and it's the comedy of obsession. All of his characters are obsessed. This right here, the one you're on right now, that's a parody of Happy Hooligan that he did called
Lankwood Leary.
There you go.
Wonderful tomato can.
Yeah. So he's referring to that can on top of Happy Hooligan's head that he wears for a hat because he's too big for a hat. And here he has a magic tomato can so he can make a wish. So he wishes for a giant sandwich.
Awesome.
And all the dogs in the neighborhood come up, and there you go. There's the screwball spin. It's a parody of the screwball spin. Wonderful stuff. Just amazing. So he was a very, very literate, erudite man who was like his own comic characters. That's Felix Boomski, an anarchist. And he had obsessions himself. He was always interested in something, whether it was fishing or Ford cars or photography or radio. And we talk about that in the book. There at the bottom of the page, you see some of the photographs he took of himself. And there he is hanging himself because he did not win the first prize in the photography contest. He was one in focus. So he was sort of like the cartoonist in Philadelphia for 20 or so years. And but his comics didn't get widely syndicated, and he's kind of forgotten today. But his main character was Jingling Johnson, a guy who cannot stop rhyming and doing really awful verse. Again, the comedy of obsession. And Jingling Johnson was him. He drew himself as Jingling Johnson. So it's a bit of a self-parody there. And in this one, this is the greatest one, because you get to meet Jingling Johnson's family. They all go on a picnic, and they're all rhyming, and they all end up beating each other up because they're all crazy. And they wind up in the dog catcher's wagon. And read the speech balloons, Kurtis. They're wonderful.
Next Sunday, we'll be out again, and we'll perform Sunshine or Rain. In crazy stunts, we four will join. The comic artist need the coin. I'll be glad when we get to the bug house.
The comic artist needs the coin.
Comic artist needs the coin.
Meta humor there. That's another thing you find in Screwball comics, is a sort of a self-awareness, that this is a comic. And that's a thread, that shows up in Mad Magazine. As a matter of fact, a lot of the stuff here in this book could be thought of as the road to Mad Comics and Mad Magazine by Harvey Kurtzman, Will Elder, Wally Wood, and all those guys.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that inspired them, and then the stuff that inspired the cartoonists that inspired them. So it goes back 2 generations.
Well, and what's great about this book is you go into so much detail.
Yeah.
About Bradford here, and like this is going to be probably the only biography we'll ever get of the guy, because he's not like you said, he's a forgotten person, and but you've written a good history on him, and this is going to be the definitive story of his life, I think.
Well, it might be. I might put out another volume with more info. I had to cut these things down, believe it or not.
Oh yeah.
My original essay was twice as long on him, but I really wanted to honor these cartoonists and not just reprint their comics, because these comics are so far in the past, we've lost the context of them. And so I wanted to kind of try to restore some of the context for people so they could understand, so they could more fully appreciate the comics. And I'm distracted by the image of the child in the bear trap.
Yeah, that is quite something. Yikes.
Oh my God. That's by Dwig.
Yep.
So I think the book, it's the best job I could do of giving. Well, my idea was, let's give these guys the fine arts treatment. Let's pretend that we're doing a monograph published by the Museum of Modern Art or something like that, like you would do a monograph on a painter, and just really try to research it and be as accurate as you can. I put notes in the back for all my sources, so I'm not making this stuff up, and just try to make it as legit and solid as I possibly could, while at the same time making it fun to read. So once I had all that stuff, I then tried to construct narratives of their lives that are interesting and fun and compelling to read.
Yeah.
I didn't want to make some dry academic piece. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I felt it was more suited to a popular market to try to make these things fun to read, since they are fun comics. I didn't want to defeat the spirit of the comics. Gus Mauger, lovely cartoonist, known also as a fine arts painter. In the fine arts world, he's known as Charles Mauger, or Charles Augustus Mauger.
Okay.
And a lot of museums who have his paintings in their permanent collections, like the Whitney, I'm not sure they're even aware that he was a popular newspaper cartoonist, but he was. And he did these incredible comics all about human neuroses. Henpecko the monk, he's a henpecked husband. Nako the monk, he cannot resist knocking or deflating or putting down or dissing anything, including Niagara Falls and the stars. Rimo the monk, like Jingling Johnson, he cannot resist speaking in rhymes. And Mufti the monk, oh man, I love these. The art in these is incredible. Speaking of Mauger, at some point, if you turn the camera back to me, I have some original Mauger art I can share.
Sure, let's do that.
So for the chapter on Mauger, I was fortunate enough to be contacted by John Kelly. You know who John Kelly is?
Who's John Kelly?
Okay, John Kelly is a comics scholar, and he was the director of. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was a comics museum, and he was contacted by Gus Mager's granddaughter, who had tons of Gus Mager stuff, and she sent him boxes of this stuff. And so John
Wonderful.
put me in touch with her and shared a few rare pieces of original art that I was able to put into the book. And she's credited Judith Mager Jim. And I got a little bit of an interview with her, a few memories of her grandfather that I also got into the chapter. After the book came out, of course, we sent her a copy. And then in gratitude, she sent back to me a very nice letter and 2 originals.
Oh, wow. Oh, man. That's amazing.
This thing is huge.
Yeah. That is huge.
Let's
wow.
So this is Mager had the main character, the longest running comic strip he had was Hawkshaw the Detective. And this is a daily for Hawkshaw the Detective, which is sort of a Sherlock Holmes parody. Beautiful art, beautiful cartooning, just really fluid, liquid line.
Beautiful.
Lots of character. And look at those sweat drops. Just the artistry of those sweat drops and those wonderful curves and the speech balloons. And then she also sent me an original strip for Oliver's Adventures, which is not a Screwball comics or a humor strip. It's a straight boys adventure strip. And look at that art.
Wow, that's great. What great composition for that too.
It's like Terry and the Pirates, but really cartoony, Bigfooty. And I just love that. I just think it's wonderful. So I was delighted to get these. And thank you, Judith.
Well, how
that daily? Someone's asking what's the size of the daily.
Yeah. It's got to be like 18 inches across or something, or more than that, 20, 24 maybe?
I was looking to see if I had my tape measure here, but I don't. But let's compare it to the Screwball book. There we go. So there's the Screwball book, and there's the rest of the strip.
Holy cow. It's just, and Screwball is not a small book. It's huge.
Let's see, put it next to me for comparison. Yeah, I don't know, man. But yeah, I think this is probably, like you said, Kurtis, 24 inches wide.
Yeah.
That's not uncommon. Most original art for dailies is that size. And one reason they did that was, like you said, for the lettering. It's hard to letter small. But also, when it's reduced, the art gets a lot tighter. And that's just how they did it.
Okay, we have another. Stephen has a question we'll answer maybe a little bit later. But we have this one. A part of the fun of reading Screwball was learning about those forgotten strips. Are there any other Screwball gems that you know that are out there but are lost or hard to find?
Yeah, lots. And I'm a little bit circumspect about talking about them because I didn't want to spoil the surprise of a second book. If we could do a second book, that's not looking like a possibility, sadly, but at least not at the moment. There are no plans for a second Screwball volume, but let me give you a couple that I considered for this book, but did not include for various reasons. One would be Harry Hirschfield. If you can find them, there are 2 books that Hyperion, Bill Blackbeard's Hyperion project, brought out in the 70s. One's a reprint of A.B. the Agent, which is a marvelous humor strip. And then the other one is a collection of it had 2 names. I think it's Dauntless Durham, and that's a brilliant strip. And it's a parody of like the adventures of it's a parody of melodramas, where the heroine's tied up on the railroad tracks and
Yes.
the one with the mustache. But it's so much more than that. It's also all about modern art and fashion and politics, and it's just loaded with stuff. He was a brilliant man. He was a polymath, and his IQ was vast. And anyway, so Hirschfield would be one. He wasn't included in the book because he was one of the King Features cartoonists, and we have so many of those already in the book. It seemed, I wanted to make room for some of the other guys. A second guy would be a guy named Thornton Fisher, Fisher. You ever heard of that guy, Kurtis?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so I hadn't either. He was mainly a sports cartoonist, but he had a wonderful screwball flair. Oh man, I wish I could dig it out. I would have to leave the room to go get it, but I just recently got a wonderful piece of original art with a signed photograph of him. But anyway, he had his own radio show as a sports commentator, but he did do some wonderful screwball strips early on. They're like 1910s, and later in his life, he did a wonderful strip called The Xanities, which was about a vaudeville family. And it's very rare and very hard to find. I have some examples. I even have a piece of original art. And I've researched his life. He also worked in comics. Anyway, I'll stop there. But there's a couple of leads for you guys. And you probably just Google it and find some artwork too out there. But someday I hope to publish something about him.
I think there might be some examples of Fisher in the book that Eddie Campbell did for us, called what was that called? The Goat Getters. Yeah.
Yeah.
If he was a sports cartoonist, I bet you there's stuff in there.
I would think so. I don't know off the top of my head. That is a very dense book.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But, I actually contributed some of the Goldberg material that's in that book.
Awesome. Well, let's see. We should probably wrap up our conversation here. This has been a great look at these two books. Thanks, Paul, for joining us. Is there anything you want to say? Oh, yeah, let's take a look at these. Definitely, yeah.
I just wanted to show this real quick. This is an original tear sheet. We call these tear sheets. This is Lollapalooza by Rube Goldberg, and this one is reprinted in the book.
But not at that size, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's smaller, but it's readable. It's very readable, and of course Dean has restored it. But this is what the original looked like. And what's on the back? The back side of Screwball, so to speak.
Oh, The Little King.
Little King by Otto Soglo, and something called Bachelor Days.
Yeah.
No idea. And it's one of those advertising comic strips.
Oh, okay.
So there you go. There's a little glimpse. And just so you can see, here's Smokey Stover. I bought piles and piles of these and tried to curate the best ones for the book that I could lay my hands on. So, check this out.
Oh, wonderful.
We reprint 20 of these in the book. This is one of my favorite comics.
Yeah.
And it's by Gene Ahern.
Yep.
And between me and Carl Linick, we have about 400 of these.
Oh, wow.
We'd love to do a book, and Dean would too. It's just, as Dean always says, it's a matter of making it worthwhile, trying to figure out the right timing and the right publishing situation so it'll sell enough copies to make it worthwhile. But maybe someday there will be a book on the Scroll Cage, which would be a wonderful thing.
That would be fantastic.
And I just want to mention that in the meantime, I'm starting my own press, Erratic Press.
Okay.
And I'm going to be self-publishing some of my stuff that way, because I have a lot of projects that would not sell enough copies for a publisher, even a very generous publisher like the Library of American Comics. it just wouldn't, there's not enough interest in it, or the cartoonist is too obscure. And so I'm publishing some monographs and books on these cartoonists myself, and it's okay if it just sells a few hundred copies. I'll be fine with that. And we'll get this art back into the world and into the hands of some collectors and fans. The first book is going to be a collection of rare gag cartoons by Jack Cole, the guy
good.
who did Plastic Man.
Right. Wow. That'd be fantastic. He's an excellent cartoonist. And that's, I think, the way that we're going to keep a lot of these obscure strips in the public eye, or just, in history, is small press people like yourself making that happen. The Library of American Comics definitely started that way as well. And, Dean would love to keep on doing the obscure strips. I have been trying to convince him to do an obscure strip by Looney Tunes director Frank Tashlin called Van Boring. I love that strip to pieces, but Dean is like, I'm going to sell like 2 copies of it, Kurtis. I was like,
exactly.
Okay, I'm going to do it myself.
That's where something like print on demand really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's the I think. Yeah.
It's funny because I knew about you before I knew you, Kurtis. You were publishing those Van Boring comics on your Facebook page.
Yeah.
I think you started a Van Boring Facebook page.
I did, yeah.
And so, I actually religiously read those and saved digitally, copied them. So thank you.
You're welcome. That was great.
It's amazing.
It's just such a great strip. Tashlin has a wonderful sense of humor. He's an excellent cartoonist, and the stuff he did, like he directed, he was the only director that Jerry Lewis would let direct his movies other than Jerry Lewis himself. So that says something about Frank Tashlin and his comedy, right?
Yeah, and he was an amazing animator. His animated Warner Brothers cartoons are really worth seeking out, guys. I haven't looked, but if you go to YouTube and type in Frank Tashlin, Tashlin, see if you can find some of those Looney Tunes that he did, because they are wonderful. They're just as funny and clever and entertaining as Tex Avery's stuff, or Bob Clampett's.
Well, he was the kind of the guy. He did a lot of Porky Pigs in the black and white era of Looney Tunes, and he was one of the directors that really spearheaded the more frenetic pace of Looney Tunes that Tex Avery would eventually be really well known for. Like Frank Tashlin kind of pioneered a lot of that.
Oh, really? Cool. So it kind of starts with that guy. Well, and you can see the through line to the Jerry Lewis movies. They're sort of like real life cartoons,
Absolutely. It's great.
So that's a really, it's like, what do you get if you take a brilliant cartoonist and give him, a multi-million-dollar budget and one of the best comedians in the business? You get Jerry Lewis and a movie like Artists and Models, which is just a wonderful movie, or Hollywood or Bust. And those were Jerry Lewis, Dean Martin vehicles directed by Frank Tashlin. They're very special.
Mm-hmm. So Stephen says, will you publish digital versions as well? He's talking about the stuff that you want to do, like the print on demand or whatever. Like, I think that's an option when you do print on demand with, like, say, Amazon or something. The digital PDF is an option for purchasing as well.
I hadn't thought about it. I sort of thought there wouldn't be any demand for that. I don't like reading comics. I prefer reading comics on paper. But then again, I'm an old fart. So yeah, I mean, if people want it digitally, I'm sure I can make that happen.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's say goodbye to everybody, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, Paul, for being the special guest on our episode today. It was wonderful to talk to you and go through Screwball. You guys got to pick up this book. It is such a treasure of amazing cartooning, really funny stuff, and take a chance on the Bungle Family. You won't be disappointed. If you like Screwball comedies and that kind of stuff, it's such a fun read.
Yeah, it's a slow burn. You're gonna invest a couple of hours of reading.
Yeah, but it's well worthwhile.
It catches hold, and you're like, oh, this is really funny. So give it a chance.
Mike Lynch is here too. He says, thanks. This was great. Thanks for tuning in, Mike. We appreciate it. He's got a good blog of his own.
Yeah, he's a great cartoonist.
Yep. And Steven says, one of my favorite recent books in the field. Many kudos. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
There you go. Yep.
That's really
Screwball
nice.
is great. Okay. We're going to sign off, and we'll end with our theme song here. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, and next week, Dean Mullaney is going to be my special guest, and we're going to take a little walk away from comic strips and talk a little bit about Corto Maltese, the stuff that he's doing, the European comic that he's been translating over the past few years. So tune in next week to talk with Dean, and that'll be at 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific or 2 p.m. Eastern, just like we are today. But thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.